All right. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for being here. My name is April Weitkamp. I am a life skills teacher in the Everett Public Schools. I have been teaching some level of self-contained special education since 1997. I started down in Kent, and since 2004, I have been teaching in Everett. I am going to be talking tonight from the perspective of a special education teacher on how I incorporate and utilize AAC in the classroom. I need to do a couple of shout outs before we start. There's some people that went through this presentation for me and are just kind of my background and my peeps that I go to for things that I need and all the stuff I've learned over the years. So first shout out would be to Barb Lark. Marcy and I were talking about her before we started tonight. She has been a mentor of mine for probably the last 15 years or more, and she's retired. And I say that loosely because now she's doing some work for SETC again, and I get to start working with her again next year. In addition to that, we've got Bernadette Nguyen, who is one of the two heads of the assistive technology department in Everett. Sarah Kinsella, who works for SETC. And then Carolee Worth, who I think is probably listening in her car, but she worked in Everett years ago and works with NWACS and asked if I would do this because she and I chat on a pretty regular basis, and she works with some of my students or former students. So welcome. If you guys have questions, please go ahead and put them in the chat, interrupt me. If you have clarifying information that you need, please do so. I'm sorry I don't have video tonight, but I do welcome visitors over time. So we can talk about that at some point too. If you have your microphone unmuted, it would be lovely if you could please take a second and mute it so that we know that we don't have a lot of background while we're talking. All right. Here we go. Okay, so I went over a little of this. Like I said, I have been in Everett since 2004. The last 12 years I have been at Jefferson Elementary, which is kind of considered middle of the district. Bit of news, I'm moving schools for the first time in a dozen years, and I'm going to be going from what right now is a K-5, and I'm going to be moving into what I taught previous to the last 12 years, which would be just 3 through 5. I say that we have a goal of 10 students because that's what our district lists. We don't have a hard cap. Standard with that, I've had as many as 13. I've had 11 for part of this year. One of them just moved to middle school early. Our staffing would be that we have 1 certificated teacher, 2 classroom paraeducators, and then every other student who needs a one-on-one, we go through the process to vet and have someone hired for that. At this time right now, have 2 behavior techs that are agency, but there's a total of 7 staff members in my classroom for the 10 kids that I have. It's a lot of management. I have cultivated a pretty fantastic team. They're almost all new, so getting to have them watch what I do and how I do things, because up until a couple of years ago, pre-COVID, I'd had the same team for a really long time, and they had learned a lot about how I teach communication, and they'd learned it with me. So bringing in a new crew has been good for me for discovery and also helping me remember what I need to get back to my roots in my next position starting in the fall. Like I said, with the staff turnover, I do have quite a few agency staff. What's fun is they're all learning and they all enjoy doing the work. They're figuring things out that they haven't done before. And so it's fantastic to have the whole team want to be a part of the process of how do we do this? How do we get better? What else do we need to know? And if you're a classroom teacher or you're an SLP even, that isn't something you can always teach, but if you can find a group of people that want to learn it, I will give you some hints near the end of the night tonight on how to make it even better. And it really means that everybody comes to the table ready to want to do that work and put themselves out there and be a part of it. I have an SLP, I've had SLPs that embed, and I have OTPTs that embed. I actually have an OTPT who knows how to use all the AAC for my class. He took courses with the rest of our group years ago and has never really lost it. So he can walk in and use just about any kind of, communication system I have within the classroom. And he'll try it at any time with the kids. The SLP, I've had a couple of new ones. So when they come in, I'm like, welcome, hi, here's what I do. Let's see what else we can learn. And it's sometimes a little bit, I think, intimidating, but it's also really fantastic when they see that it's going to be one of those places where you can come and learn and do all the cool stuff. So, and as it says here at the bottom, we have lots of methods of AAC in our classroom. Okay, so this evening, what I'd like to do, and please let me know if I'm getting off topic or if there's something I don't cover, I'm going to talk about what AAC I use and how I incorporate it. I have specifically broken it down by area of instruction. So if you were a teacher, I'm going to give you a couple practical tips for each curricular area that you work on, and then we can kind of just talk about how to make it a part of your practice. We're going to discuss a few ways you can support your parents and get your staff to try. We're going to talk about barriers because everything post-COVID seems to be a barrier, or just a little bit harder and a little bit more. And I pulled out a couple slides from my previous ones, but this is still hard. We're still not back to where I feel like I was before, but maybe we won't. We're just going to do the next best thing, and we're going to keep learning what we can do from this point forward. And I want to remind you all to go slow and give yourself grace. If you're trying, you're winning because your kids are benefiting from what it is that you're doing. And just a few tips and tricks that I have used over the years and that make it work for me and my team. What I'm going to tell you, and this says I'm going to get on my soapbox. This, for me as a teacher, is the most important part of my work. And I heard this my whole teaching training. I hear this every single year. I hear this every meeting I go to. Behavior is communication. But I'm going to add a little bit, and this is one of my favorite phrases. It's not communication if I know what you're going to say. So my kids have a lot of things that they want to say to me or to anybody else in our classroom. If I'm setting them up to say it, it's not really sincere communication. And they're not going to believe that I hear them or see them or want what's best for them until I'm meeting all the parts of their needs. And sometimes that starts with and finishes with the communication. I'm not an SLP. I probably do parts of it incorrectly, but I'm trying. And when I get SLPs that come in or I learn something new from them, I try and implement it. One of my favorite things to do every single year, and Marcy, I hope we can do this in person, is I used to attend the NWACS conferences every year in Bellevue with my speech therapist. So we could sit together and we would fill notepads of thoughts that we had as we were watching and listening about our students and the things that we use and the things that we do and what we wanted to try next. So as an SLP or as a teacher, that person is there to be your ally. That other person that is there to do that work with you and your students. Everybody goes about it differently. See where you can find your common ground and find which things bring you the most joy, the most excitement, and start those little pieces first. It really will make a difference. Okay, so the reason I started doing all this communication stuff was because of art. I'd had several other therapists. Actually, Paula Furyk's going to be frustrated at me if I don't also shout out to her, because she started to try and bring pod in when I had my son, and this was like 13 years ago. And I came back from maternity leave and she said, I did this thing, don't get upset with me. And I went, okay, let's figure it out. And I started using it, and then we moved schools. And so Barb, who's a speech therapist for years and years, moved with me. And she was embedding in my classroom. And if you don't know her, I suggest you find her. She's an amazing. If you do, you know how she is, and you know her gentle nature, and you know how kids just get excited to see her and be around her and watch what she's doing. And I started watching, and I got a little jealous because the kids were like, oh, she's here, she's the cat's pajamas, I want to do stuff with her. But I started hearing in the back of the classroom what they were doing and seeing what they were starting to tell her. And I was like, I want in, I want to know what's happening back there. I want to do it. And so I started to have her come in during whole group instruction or during small group instruction. And she started to model a little bit of the stuff that she'd been doing with the kids individually in the back of the room within the classroom. And we had some conversations about boundaries and how we were going to do it. But what happened was I could see what they were doing. I could see how what she was sitting with them working on while I was teaching was part of the content. Not only part of the content, but part of them engaging in the content with a person. And that's not something that we often see our kids do, is engage in content and an individual while we're working. And for me, I went, oh. And so that's the point at which I said, I kind of feel like we should all learn this. And we set up a series of classes for us as a group that we then started to learn how to do many of the things that I still do now. And I will tell you all how to make that work for your TPEP teachers before we finish tonight, because that's fantastic. Okay, so I'm going to talk about a little bit about the AAC in my classroom. The one in the upper right corner that you see on the screen is the core vocabulary that I use in my room. Core came on a little bit later. I started, like I said, 12 years ago, and I started learning how to do POD first. About 4 or 5 years after that, I learned about core. And I got a group of SLPs who I love and respect, helped us put this together. And this is the one that I still use. That particular board is posted all over the classroom. It's on all of the cupboards, which are all locked, by the way, because then you have to ask me for things before you can have the stuff in those cupboards. It goes to the cafeteria. It's stuck to the tables. It's on the walls. It's on the kids' desks. And there's another photo a couple slides later. It is a really big one that we practice tear off and sentence build and do all sorts of activities with. And that can be during circle time or during filler activities, all sorts of stuff that we have. I'm leaning over, as this everybody got used to during virtual instruction. This is my pod. It's not a true pod because it doesn't look like the ones that, they have with the spiral binding. And so I would probably get scolded by the trainers for pod. But this has lived with me, and the first few pages have been replaced more times than I want to acknowledge, since I started using it about 12 years ago. And it gets stepped on and it gets loved really hard, but this goes where I go. There's actually some funny stories about a nightmare I had once in which I was about to do a presentation, but somebody thought they would decorate my classroom by taking it apart and putting the pages around the room for people to look at. And if any of you know anything about POD, it's Pragmatic Organized Dynamic Display. It came out of CPEC, which is a school in New Zealand. It was designed for people with cerebral palsy. So it is a partner-assisted navigation system, which means that the student isn't going to be doing the navigation, the partner will be doing the navigation. I use a group pod, which is this one right here, when I'm teaching in the classroom. As much as I should? No, but I still use it. And I can tell you a little bit about how that worked when I started it. And I have some semblance of some individual pods that have been made for my students that died during COVID because I wasn't doing in-person instruction. And one of my staff members and I's next goal for the fall is to remake them all. Because when I finally got to go to pod training about 6 years ago, I learned that not only is it good to have high-tech AAC, but it's also really good to have a backup. And I am a firm believer in there is a bridge between we go from using a PCS image or a PEX system to throwing an iPad at the child. And so there's some things that I like to do in the meantime to get us there. In addition, we have we have pod, we have core, we have our VOCA systems. I brought home one of my students for tonight. This is it's got touch chat, HD with word power in it. Most of my kids are on the 48 cell. I do have a couple kids on 25 or some kids that have some specialized cells. If they have outside speech therapists, the speech therapist from my school and I will work together to coordinate how we like the setup and what we want to see happen with it, how we'll utilize it in the classroom, and we make sure we coordinate regularly. A lot of PCS images because we have kids from kindergarten through 5th grade. Everything is all things in my classroom. We have kids who've never had any communication training. I've got kids that are building whole sentences using their devices or learning how to do whole sentences. So we've got team members on staff that walk around with just the PCS images because we have kids that are at that stage of recognition. I should also tell you that we also use sign. So we are multimodal in our learning. If I'm going to teach you how to use say more, I'm going to talk while I touch it, I'm going to touch it, and I'm going to sign it. I'm very fortunate to have a paraeducator who's actually fluent in sign. So she's been teaching us quite a bit this year. But we're going to do all the things in order to get to what our kids really need in terms of how they want to communicate with us. I do have a Go Talk, which is a really old, and the older I get, the more I'm like, I like this old tech. It kind of works for me. I almost miss the IntelliKeys overlays too, Marcy. Those were pretty good. They were awesome at the time. I have a GoTap that's just 4 images at this point with the PCS, and it's got the auditory input. funny thing is my guy has started to use it more than I have ever seen him use it in the past. And we're starting to get him to look to differentiate pictures too, which is super cool. Context boards, you can see one down here in the corner. That is a cooking context board. So if we are doing a cooking activity in my classroom, the kids are going to have a lot of stuff because they're going to have their pod or their iPad if they have one. They're going to have their core vocabulary that's stuck to their desk. They're going to have the context specific board, which I also have in a large form, and I'll probably bring up my big core also, and I will hop back and forth. I've had people say that when they come in to watch, they get a little overwhelmed because it doesn't bother me to move back and forth between different methods or different types of AAC because I've been using them for so long. What I'll say is when you start, pick one and just do one. Because until you become comfortable with one, it's really hard to try and add more to it. And you're going to feel overwhelmed and you're going to get frustrated at yourself. Don't. Just try the one and encourage yourself as you go, and it does get easier over time. Because I remember at one point I had kids on 2 different apps, plus I was using Pod, plus I was using something else, and my brain would go, wait, which color coding is it for which kind of component of language, depending upon which app it was that we were using. And so as I was working with kids, I was also trying to call out for staff to help them remember which way they were organizing it in their own brains. So pick one, start small, and if you're not comfortable with high tech, that's why sometimes a lower tech option, although this requires a massive investment in time, is sometimes the way to go. And then the last one is something I learned at an NWACS conference a long time ago about read, ask, answer, and prompt boards. So those are wrap boards, and those are kind of a context specific. And I have a picture a couple further down, just conversation boards that I often use related to books that we're reading. Okay, so those are some things that are used. These are direct photos of what I've got right now. I took these this week. So here in the lower right, we've got a student who's got his own. This is his personal iPad, and he's got 2 different layouts that we utilize. Here's his core. Here's my big core. And one of the things that we've been working on this year, I did a course a couple of years ago on comprehensive literacy for all. And we are, I've been working on predictable chart writing. And so I've taken a lot of the things that I use within core and how I teach spontaneous novel utterance generation. And I teach the kids phrases and activities using core. We then also make sure that we are helping to foster the sentence development and pattern chart or predictable chart writing by having the kids build sentences. And so if we have a theme like I see, and we've done I see, and we've had spring sentences, and then we have gone, now, you know, I like, I am. And we built a book over the course of the year that's all about the kids and the things that they've done and about themselves, that they can go back and do all the sentence building, but it relates back to the activities we've done over the course of this year. And I can tell you right now that if you're starting with core, my very favorite one at the beginning of the year is I take a glass jar and I put something the kids want inside, and I sit them in front of me at the table, and I turn the lid really hard and I set it in front of them. And they have to ask me for help. And then they have to ask me to open it before I'm going to give them what's in the jar. Because the things that I want my kids to do right away when they start in the fall is to ask me for help and to tell me what they need, not just to hold things out and go, at me. So you have other ways to do this, because then if they practiced it there, they can practice it at their desk, and they can practice it, you know, on the toy cupboard that's locked closed. So when I give them the cue for playtime, they have to go ask someone, because it's stuck right on those cupboards, to please help open that cupboard so that they can have what's inside. So we kind of set it up to start in such a way that we're teaching it as we go. And that makes a huge difference. What you see up in this upper right corner is chat editor. Now, if you are a classroom teacher and you do not have chat editor, I suggest you write this down right now. Saltillo has a free version, which is essentially touch chat, that you can download and use. All you have to have is an iPad or an AAC device that you can plug in, and it will actually do the speech generation as well. So this one up here, I have set so that I can use it with the whole class, and it mirrors the students' iPads. So if I've got a particular section of their iPad that I've done, and my speech therapist utilizes it when she comes in too. So they can use their individual, they can use the core, but that they can also go up and do the sentences with chat editor. They hit that period to finish the sentence and it will produce the speech. So this is our touch sensitive box light. So the kids come up and they can utilize this to talk to us, make requests, make comments, do all of the different things that we have going on in the classroom at any given moment. Okay, I told you I got anything and everything in here. This here, I've got a little boy who just started with us in kindergarten in January, and he had never been to school before, and he has not had any communication training. COVID threw a monkey wrench in a lot of kids getting early services. I have to tell you the coolest thing, and I'm sure Haley's nodding her head on with her camera off. This little guy, we don't believe in using signs just for snack or using communication just for snack. So for the last 2 months, any and everything we want to do with our little guy, we are doing, and then having him ask for more. We play tickle. We play Miss April flips me upside down. We get our food out. We want to make this noise. We want to make this thing turn. He's continually being asked to tell us more. And so we would say it, we would hold up the card, we would have him sign it. He's gotten to the point where for the last 2 weeks, he'll take our hands and put them together. He won't put his own together yet, but he'll take our hands and put them together. We're like, you said more. So then we touch them more. Then we give him what he wants. Today, 2, maybe 3 times, and this was like goosebump worthy for those of you that have watched this happen before. He looked right at one of the staff members because we only put a little food on his plate because I will use food, but it's not the only thing I do. And she said, well, what do you want? And he went, help. He touched more with his own hand. That was, that was like, tears and all the fancy stuff today. That was the best part. This is the Go Talk. Funny enough, I will take a tool that one kid is using and put it in front of any child who's having trouble at a moment if I think it will help them tune into what's going on. So I've actually utilized this with more than one child. This is on the one child's desk. And then I read some stuff about PECS books this year, and the research did not show that, data did not show that they are effective as much as some people would like to think. I don't think anything is off the table when I'm going to learn about how to help my kids communicate. I was thinking this morning in the car, I've even used true object-based images, Toby's, with kids who that was where they were with their learning. What we had is we have in this upper right corner, we have a young man. I refer to him as my baby bear because he's a big boy and he's got big paws. And he's a growly sometimes. He had PCS images on his desk to make requests, but he was not doing well at differentiating. And so his behavior tech talked to the speech therapist and she said, I kind of just want to try this and see what happens. And we went, well, okay, let's try it. Let's see what's going to happen. So we printed the pieces and he's got a first sentence, so he knows what his expectation is. But then he's also just got an I want, and then he has literally just 6 pictures, you guys. That's all we started with. And he looked at me today and he made sure his I want was empty. And he looked at me and reached out because his behavior tech was gone today. And I said, well, tell me what it is you want. And he picked up food because the guy would always take a computer. He didn't want to ask me for a computer. He picked up food. He put it down and said, I want food. He tracked it from left to right. He stood up, took my hand and walked across the classroom to go get his lunchbox from where it goes. And our BCBA came in and he went, it's made a huge difference that he has to pick them up and put them on, hasn't it? And I thought, yep. And so that's why nothing is ever off the table. When he had pictures, he'd just punch on the desk and get frustrated because it didn't work. He actually has to look at it, pull it off, and differentiate it. Now, that doesn't mean that's the only way he's using it. He also has an iPad with touch chat that he practices on. He also uses, the signs for things. I said, well, what is it you need? And he went like this at me today. And I said, yes, I will help you. Let's put help on. So any and all things. He also just got his own student's personal device. And so the SLP and I are just now starting to work with the speech and language pathologist at his clinic to see what it is that we can help them do to reinforce it in every part of his environment.
Hey, April.
Yes.
If I were to just summarize all of this amazing information, one of the themes that I see is instant access and opportunity.
Yes.
Right. Because you have all these pictures all over the classroom at within, 12 inches of any way you turn.
Mhm.
Um,
And there are times that I don't. I have one young lady who, if I put a device in front of her, especially if her filter is low, she does not see it. She's just not, her bandwidth is not in the place. And so she physically needs a lot from me, but then I actually go low tech with her because it requires a little bit more of the reciprocation. So I'll oftentimes pull out the pod because she also is really good at watching my process. So the other day I had a question for her, and I'm just going to model how I did them. I would say, I have something to say. I'm going to go to more to say. And if you've seen a pod before, there's navigation pages. So it's telling me exactly where to go. So I'm going to go to that page. I'm going to tell you something. Let's go to that page. So all of these are tabbed and it talks about it. Let's say, ask you something about right now. And it's about food. So this is usually how I introduce when I watch my young girl in the morning and she's struggling at all. I'll start a conversation with her this way because she'll shout out words, but it takes her a long time to process and then produce the language or even touch the picture. So I go slow. And Pod is fantastic for that because you have to go slow. You're turning the pages as you go and you have to find yourself. I ate a sandwich for breakfast because I eat anything for breakfast, truly. Did you eat? And she'll look at me and she'll say, snack. But it takes her 10 seconds or more before she decides to tell me. Say, oh, snack. Did you want a snack? And at this point, I don't have yes, no readily available. So if one of the staff members has yes, no, they can use it that way. Or I have my core vocabulary, that single page, and up in the upper right-hand corner of 4 is yes and no. And so I'll sit there and I'll wait and I'll wait. And then if she doesn't know, I'll say, I asked if you ate. And then I'll gesture to that portion of the core and wait to see what she's going to say back. So yeah, always available communication. Isn't that the other way we talk about AAC, Marcy, as you call it, always available communication?
Yes, that's exactly right. Yep.
Yeah, and then this context and images one, I didn't put a picture in for this one. I didn't like any of the photos. We use PCS images. Oh no, it's on the next slide. No. PCS images for math. So here's your read, ask, answer, and prompt book. This is just a conversational page. Read, ask, answer, and prompt. This is just how to have a conversation about this book. Now, would I only use that? I would probably be using that with a core on somebody's desk in either my pod or an iPad, because having spent as much time with it as I have, I will kind of know where I'm going to go within each device or within each thing. For those of you that are not comfortable or familiar, plan ahead and pick one. So I'm going to stop showing my video for a second and just talk. One of my favorite stories to read when you're going to start something new for literacy time, if you want to have a really easy way to make a connection with a kid and play on a device or play a game, is to pull a book like Goodnight Gorilla or Bark George. Something that has fun noises, has nonsense to it, because then I can have my read, ask, answer, and prompt book, and I can pick things that are silly. Both Bark George and Goodnight Gorilla also have a phenomenal amount of animal noises and vocabulary. And so if you want to play with a kid and you want to, because let's play, let's read a story, let's just play with it. It's a great way to do some of this stuff without actually looking like you're setting down to do this big prepared lesson. Because the reality is things are going to go sideways and it's never going to happen the way you want it to. So one of the things that I'll do is I'll say, we're going to read a story about an animal. And so I'm doing it here. Probably should have it open on my computer too. And I'll go to animals, and in the iPad, and I've told this to several teachers when they've come for visits or SLPs, I will choose the animal sounds, because in the story Bark George, George continually makes the wrong animal sound. his mom's telling him to bark and he's making a different sound. So I can have the kid tell me the animal, or I can say, oh, that's really silly. They don't make that sound, but I can just start playing with the device and with the things in front of me as I'm talking. And all I'm doing is I'm adding that little bit, that little component to bring the kids back to, look, this isn't just to tell me what you want. There's a lot of application for it. And I'll go in and I'll say, we read that, and it'll say, George said quack. That is silly. And so I'll find it, or I'll find it on my core and I'll say, I think that's just, that's just, oh, because that's one of the words on my core. So yeah, it's never I guess what I should say is, for me, unless it's a formal lesson, it's not a deliberate way in which I bring in the AAC. It's bring it in and see where it will fit. I have a phenomenal speech pathologist, Bernadette, actually. She comes in once a week to play and to hang out and to do things. And I had her go through the slides and kind of think about what it was that I was going to say. And she had a little bit of a recommendation. And I wanted to just read to you exactly what she said when she went through the slides. She said, as an SLP that comes into your classroom this year, and this is the first year she's ever come in, worked with Bernadette for years, but she's never just actively come in my room. She said, I think listening and talking with me, about the students is a really important way for me to embed myself and model any AAC that I'm doing. She said, you know your students really well. So as the teacher, you do know your kids. She said, so you can recommend their learning style, where they are with their communication behavior, what their strengths are. So the factors that would help anybody coming in are the things that I can share. When Bernadette was coming in to meet one of my students, I said, oh, she's not going to want to do that, but this might be a good way to get her involved. Or this kiddo is just starting on this, so make sure you pull this component in, and I'll make a recommendation on a favorite book or something else that I know that the kids like to help make that connection happen a little bit. And that definitely, she said, has made a difference. She said, it's really key to talk with the teachers and learn how they can support the teacher in the classroom and how they can embed themselves during literacy to model and understanding the barriers that they would have and where they could work to help improve. So the idea is, she came in, she visited with me, we talked about it a little bit ahead of time, and then she'll come in and she'll say, so who can I work with? And I'm like, you can take who you want to. You can take 2 or 3 and you can do something if you want some recommendations. And I always have, I have a big basket full of books with read, ask, answer, and prompt pages with them. I've got tons of books in the back of the room. I've got my book boxes where the kids have some very specific things that they like. I have one kid that's obsessed with I Spy books. So if you want to play I Spy, you can do I See, and you're pulling in then again those core sentences, our core vocabulary that we worked on, and our predictable chart writing. So those are just some things that I put together and recommendations that I had from others. Okay, so I'm going to go back to sharing my screen for a moment. And I want to talk about specific curricular areas that you guys can add, things that you can do. So the reason I have it called Go Beyond I Want is one of the first webinars that I did years ago when I started to talk about core vocabulary was the idea that I don't really ever want a kid to say I want to me. I know what you want, and you often tell me all the things that you want, but I want you to tell me something else. And I didn't use the phrase contingent comment, but I know that Marcy and I talked about this when we were talking about this one. Contingent comments, and this is where I started learning from my mentor years ago, was the idea that if I'm sitting and I'm doing a ULS lesson, unique learning systems, I know that a lot of school districts have gone to that. If I'm doing a ULS lesson, and I remember this is a very, very vivid memory. We were doing one years and years ago on community. And I had a young man who'd moved to Washington from Texas as a kindergartner or beginning first grader. And at that point in the state of Texas, if you didn't talk, you didn't get speech. So he came with no communication, and we had gotten him started using Pod, and he was a voracious book person. And he ate them, but he also loved them hardcore. And he learned to treat them kindly. But I remember we were doing a whole lesson on community. And so he's sitting, and at this point I had My kids were a little different than they are now, but he was sitting and there was a speech therapist next to him. And then all the other kids were positioned in their seats around the classroom. And there were paraeducators interspersed throughout. And this was when we just started to pod. And I was starting to try and use this big book while I was talking and teaching to the class. But in the course of the community conversation, we were talking about stores you would go to and things. And I remember this guy, and I'm trying to find the page that it was on, he got so derailed because he wanted to talk about one specific place. And so Barb had gone through and she'd done her navigation, said, well, we're going to talk about something. And she went to the categories page. And then from categories, my book is falling apart as we're talking. She went to places. And if you know a pod, well, you know this, but if you go to the second page of places, so it's not in mine, it's in the kids, there's a whole page that has fast food restaurants on it, all sorts of different things. And you can see mine's all drawn on too, because if it's not there, I'm just going to add mine over time. This young man got so excited that there was a picture of Burger King in there. And it is his very favorite place to go, that they had a 3-minute contingent conversation off to the side all about Burger King and what he likes to order at Burger King. And I could have, and probably at some point in my own professional career would have gone, that's not what we're talking about right now. But what I realized was he was way more engaged in this lesson about the community because he had something that he recognized and he had something that he identified and was important to him to talk about, rather than me saying, well, we have to talk about how you're going to navigate to the grocery store. So part of it is me giving up my control freakery about it has to be my way all the time, and owning that in that 3 minutes, he was still on task. He was still talking about the community. He was still talking about places you can go and visit. He was still right with what we were doing. He was just talking to the person next to him really quietly, kind of like a turn and talk you would do in a neurotypical classroom, about the content and where it had meaning for him. And then I could say, okay. And, you know, the SLP raised her hand and she said, he has something he wants to tell us. And so I came over and I talked to him and he told me, and I said, oh, you love Burger King? And my friend's biggest thing he would do when he got excited, he would go, oh. He got so excited to tell me about it that every single day for the next 2 weeks when we read that lesson, he wanted to tell me about Burger King. And I could then say, oh, I don't want to talk about it right now. But boy, was he engaged in what. And it was like, this is why I need to slow down and take a look at it and own that there might be something more that I'm missing in how I'm doing this with the kids. Because I was a firm believer, and still sometimes I'm a firm believer in how much content can I shove down your throat? Because I really want you to learn all of this, right? And we'll get there, but we might get there in a little bit more of a roundabout way or a little bit more creatively. And in the meantime, those kids know that we're hearing them and we're right there with them because we're having those conversations every day. Okay, so if you don't have the slides, I did send a PDF copy. What I'm going to ask you guys to do is, as I talk about the different curricular areas and suggestions you can type, make a note just of one thing you want to try with your kids. Because when I started doing this, you guys, I did one thing. And I taught one lesson a day in which I utilized pod. And I remember the very first time I did it. If you ever go find any of the other webinars I've done in the past, there's some good stories out there. Because I remember we were talking about jelly beans and colors. It's that vivid 12 years later, what I was doing that day. There was stuff all over the floor. Things were flying in every direction. I couldn't remember where I was navigating or what I was doing. And I felt ridiculous doing it, but I did it. And my kids paid so much attention. It was like, she's talking to us. She's using these pictures and she's doing it differently. And it made me, as a fast talker, slow down to navigate too. And I had never seen my students that excited or that with it, that for the next 3 years after that, everybody had a pod and they would follow right along with me and they would turn each and every page, or they would have somebody next to them helping them do it. And it was really interesting when I started to slow down and do it like that. I had a young man who would start yelling out things like, he'd yell movie script lines, but they were always contextually perfect. They fit what was going on in the moment. And so in slowing down and having to do something I wasn't comfortable doing, I learned some things I didn't know about what I needed to be doing differently in my own practice, because it is practice.
I know you're going to jump into curriculum, and there's something that you've been talking about through this whole presentation, in all of the different methods that you're using in the classroom. You're modeling, you're touching,
Always.
and I think you just haven't. We're just going to say that explicitly, right?
Model, 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 and model again.
Right, right.
Always.
Yeah, the pictures
So-
aren't just for the kids. They're
No,
actually, yes,
no. Not only are the pictures not for the kids, the pictures are for the staff.
right.
As the instructor in the classroom, I am modeling for myself. I am modeling for my students, and I am modeling for the staff how to do this, where it's important to do it. And I will be watching somebody do something, and I'll say, oh, Haley's like, I vouch for this. She does it all the time. Haley, right here in the chat, works in my classroom. And so since she came on in January, she's learning all sorts of things about how to model and new things. And somebody will be like, well, I don't know where to find it. I will call out in the middle of class where to find something, or I will open it and show you exactly where to find it. And then we'll all stop and practice. It's important. And the best part about modeling is you're going to do it wrong all the time. But if I don't do it first and look a little bit silly and look like I don't know what I'm doing, nobody else is going to take that risk. It's on me as the leader in the classroom. Here's my soapbox, everybody. Sorry. It's on me. Hi, Kara. It's on me as the teacher to do this and to look a little silly and to be vulnerable. Because if I won't, nobody else is going to want to take that risk. And that's where the real buy-in is. And that's also where you're going to get the most output from your kids and from your staff. Because as soon as they see you being willing to try all these things, they're going to be like, okay, fine. If she can do it and look ridiculous or not be confident in what she's doing, then I can too. And I come across as somebody who knows what I'm doing now, but every day I screw it up. And every day I did something I need to fix for the next time I'm going to do it. But the kids get there, and the parents get there, and the staff gets there if you step forward first and try for yourself. And I say this because I'm talking to the teachers. Now, SLPs, I know that we are a tough group, and I will talk to you in a couple of minutes about how to make that a little bit better if you are going into a classroom. Okay.
We have about 15 minutes.
That's it. All right,
Yeah.
let's go quickly through some recommendations. If you're doing ULS, Unique Learning Systems, use the pod. Practice those contingent conversations. You know your theme for the entire month. Actually, you know for the whole year now. So pick some things that you like. Let go of needing to control everything. And this comes from a lady who is a control freak. I can't be in control and do all the things I want to do. I can't be in control and have people not having conversations on the side or have people not modeling things in the classroom. But in those models and in that practice, what are my students getting that's more beneficial than me needing them to get through this content right now? We talked a little bit about reading a story and commenting and making it silly and making it fun. And Kara, I got permission, but I can tell you that Kara and I share a student. She was his private therapist for several years. And I spent a year and a half with his mom doing virtual instruction on the computer. Valerie and I talked about it, and she told me so many times that the student that we shared named Donovan, she's like, I never thought that you knew what you were talking about when you said he could do all these things until I had to be teacher mom at home. And we started to do it. And she's like, I got out one iPad, and then he had two because he had a school one and a home one. And so they would use them for different purposes. And he would show her how he could navigate back and forth and make comments on one and pick vocabulary in the other. And so he eventually schooled his mom, spending time at home, but just in the ways that he knew what to do, what he wanted. And his favorite series was the Little Blue Truck. So they ended up getting every Little Blue Truck book with each theme, and he could pick the one, and then he can talk about that theme and how it has meaning. And she still sends pictures of the messages that he tells her about what's coming up in their lives, so he can talk to me about it on his iPad too. So you can use core with any read, ask, answer, and prompt board. It's got enough other things on it. Who is there? What are they doing? I see it. There's so many basics within core, especially if you're starting to teach it in the classroom, that you can use. And for those of you that haven't read Comprehensive Literacy for All, read it. And then read it again, which is my summer reading. And then take a look at one thing you want to pull from there and figure out how to use a little AAC with. And when I say AAC, it's not, you know, an iPad where a kid's going to yell at me, which, by the way, you just look at them, you say, it's not your turn to talk, and you turn it over. In any class, a kid would shout out, and I would say the same thing. So that's how I deal with kids yelling out in a classroom. Okay, so math, vocabulary, use your PCS images, you model and comment or ask in their device. If you have a child that's working on addition, isn't it cool that they can then build that entire addition problem and tell you the answer when they came up with the answer? That's a fantastic way. And I'll start modeling. I'll say, oh, okay, I'm going to do a math problem. And I'll map out my math problem. I'll finish it and I'll input all the pieces and then I'll have it read it. And I'll say, okay, now it's your turn. Let's do all the steps and you get to do it. And sometimes they'll get to go show it to another person or practice it in another way. Use those PCS images. If I'm working on more and less, I'm going to use more and less and I'm going to have them in cards. But I also have big and little right on my core. The kids need to know that more and big are essentially the same thing. And little and less are kind of the same thing. And then I've got same and different right there. I've got some and all. All of this can be utilized within math and it's sitting right there on the desk so I can refer to it. I also have it in an individual size. They also might tell you something like my stomach hurts, I don't want to do math right now. You never know what's going to come out. And if we don't have those things there for them, they can't. Written expression. I have done a whole series of trainings and we went and I found a way to adapt the district writing curriculum. So Building Foundations That Last is a personal narrative writing curriculum that we start in kindergarten in Everett. And I found ways through using AAC. And I do actively teach, how do we know what who means? How do we answer questions about it? If you're familiar with it, there's a great curriculum called Tuned Into Learning that actually has a whole book that is just WH questions. And so we practice answering those WH questions and then we bring it back. We start using photographs of the kids to work on producing vocabulary. And then we teach the kids how to build sentences, both in the dialogue box on their iPad or just writing it out and drawing the picture that goes with it. It's fantastic. If you've got a kid that wants to tell you a story, you know, we're plants and then we were doing picture sequencing. First a seed, give it water, last it grows. There's a lot of things that you can do if you just have a few little pieces or PCS images as well. Self-help and adaptive. Right now, I have a young man who has type 1 diabetes. His blood sugar wigs out. We have been working for months now on him being able to tell me when something isn't working, and we use his glucose monitor to do so. But the other day when his numbers hit almost 400, which is really high for him, he looked right at his para. He said, I feel funny, sick. And the phrase, I feel funny, is what we've been using when his body isn't feeling well because of his blood sugar. He did it for the first time himself, you guys. That was so huge. As I'm like planning his IEP next week, I'm going to write a goal when he's going to start monitoring his own numbers and advocating for how he's feeling. So it's working. And I always hear people tell me, and I've said this in past, with my younger self, my kids need to tell me no. My kids need to tell me to go away. My kids need to tell me to stop. That is the basis for advocacy. We can want something for them, but until they can tell me no, and until they can tell me I need a break, I'm not going to do this right now, I'm not in a place to, I'm not doing them any good. The learning isn't going to be okay if they're not able to tell me no, not now. We'll get back to it. I had a young man who his first thing he told me in his own individual pod when he got it was buzz off. So I did for 3 seconds. And I turned around and said, okay, now what else do you want to tell me, buddy? It's still the basis for everything. I've got to be able to tell you no. This is a very victimized group of children that we all know more than most others. Using the word no and meaning it is important. And if they can't do it with the people that they see every day, they're not going to use it with others. So tell me no. I'll come back to you in 3 seconds. We'll try again. But give them the opportunity to do that and asking for help. Okay, behavior is all emotions. It's all the things that are going on. It's all of the feelings. Any time in which I am using some sort of a system, even pictures, to have a kid tell me how they're feeling, it is way better than biting and screaming and hitting and kicking and scratching. We are already winning if they are even just looking at us, modeling it, whether their filter is in a place to say it or not. I can model it. And I go back to the story. I had a young lady who, she had an explosive temper. And when she got upset, she would yell profanity and fling things. And I looked at her one day, and Sarah Kinsella from SUTC was there that day. I looked at her and I said, I have something to say. And I was using my pod. I said, it looks to me like you're feeling mad. And I said, it looks to me, not it looks like you are. It looks to me like you're feeling mad. And she stopped in the middle of a scream. She stopped and she looked at me and she got in her iPad and she said, I feel sad. And I went, oh, honey, I did not know that was your sad. But you are having a feeling and I'm so glad you can tell me. Now, she still wanted to throw things and get mad, but it stopped her in her tracks and it validated where she was, and then we could try something else. How long would that have gone if I hadn't given her the time and the modeling to do that? A long time. When you're doing personal social, you can find their friends' names. They can talk about who they want to play with. They can do my turn, your turn on core and play board games. Board game Friday in my room is a thing. We practice every Friday. We have contact sports, we have our core, and we have our other ways that we communicate. If you're bringing in gen ed kids, what a great way to teach general education or neurotypical peers about your students and all the capabilities they have, then pull out all these universal ways that you can communicate. They get really good really fast and they want to help the kids figure out how to do it. I remember going to 5th grade camp years ago and having kids watch me and go, he's having a full conversation with you. I know, isn't it cool? I'm going to do that. Come sit with me. Let's do this together. Once you start it, you guys, it really lends itself really, really well. Marcy, I'm sorry, I'm going to go over. I'm like a talking queen today.
That is okay. What I will do is, for those of you who are clear for the need to get off at the 1 hour mark, I'll put our link to our survey and CE certificate in the chat in just a moment. And if you can stay on, we'll go, what do you think? Another 15 minutes, 10? 15?
Oh, probably not that long. I don't know I'll need that long. Okay, so thank you for letting me go a little further. I'm going to go back a slide because I want to talk about families. Families know their kids. They really do. But they always want ways to help their kids do a bit more and get a little bit better. So I've talked about this ad nauseum tonight. You got to make yourself vulnerable. You got to be okay looking like you don't know what's going on all the time. Because you are often viewed as the expert. But even experts make mistakes. And if you're never willing to look vulnerable or make those mistakes, many other people aren't going to want to learn from you because they're going to feel, I don't want to screw up. I don't want to mess up. And I remember years ago having conversations with my staff. They're like, I don't want to mess up how to find the message. And I'm like, but the kids will all the time. So why can't we screw up, get ourselves into a dead end and go, I don't know how to find it. Let's do it together. Because then you can have a pretend phonics or a mini phonics lesson. Because if I'm looking for a piece of vocabulary in a touch chat, I can go to the word prediction feature or the find word feature. And together we can practice our phonics on how to find it. Because then the kids learn that as well. It's kind of like when we're looking for an action word, but I know what it starts with, and then I have to go look and see if I can find it. There are so many ways that putting yourself out there and going, I don't know, can we try it together? Gives everybody a little bit of freedom and a sense of safety in how you're doing it. So at home, parents know how their kids communicate. They have their own systems and their own methodology within their home. It doesn't mean you can't do more and make it more universal and better for everybody. But I like to give them glimpses. And one of my favorite things to do, and this is for staff too, I'm like, do you want to take the iPad home and play with it this weekend? The young man I was telling you about who would read his stories with his mom, when we switched him from Proloquo to Touch Chat because he wasn't using Proloquo correctly, they were really worried and concerned about how to do it. And I said, here's what you're going to do. You're going to take this home tonight. And when the kids are in bed, you two are going to try and tell each other things without speaking. You know, pour your glass of your favorite beverage, sit down, act goofy, try to play a board game, do something together that you can do, and be silly through the process of trying to figure out how to navigate through it. I can't tell you how many parents have said that was a great time. I've had interns that are like, I spent a whole night trying to talk to people. I looked ridiculous, but I figured a lot out in that couple of hours. My daughter spent a year and a half. She's 5. She spent a year and a half sitting behind me in this room while I taught during COVID. She knew all the cues. She could navigate the pod because she just accidentally learned it listening to her mom teach on the computer for a long time. But what I was saying is, you know, we'll see glimpses, but we won't experience what happens in their homes. Encourage families to try it. They don't have to have their AAC with them all the time. I have a parent who, when she would take the pods places, she would pick her battles and know that she was only going these 2 places, so she'd take those 2 pages out, because taking her 2 boys, plus the materials that they needed, plus the whole thing was more than she wanted to do, but she wasn't willing to leave home without anything. So she would take enough to make it through what she wanted to do in those moments until they had a device that was more mobile and easier for them. She'll still take the pages out of the pod when she takes their iPads now, because the vocabulary is different and she never wants them to go without. Give families grace and show them ways in which they can enhance what they do in their home when they're using that AAC. I send probably 4 or 5 copies of Core home with the families throughout the year. And I'll say, put one on your refrigerator, put one next to them, put one in their bedroom, because they can say, help, they can say, I don't like it, they can say, you do it. And once the parents start looking as I'm saying all these phrases, they're like, it's all on that one page. I'm like, yep, it is. So find one more thing you want to tell them to do. You know, if you want them to set the table, say, you do it. And you refer to it and they can say, I did it. Yes, good job. There are a lot of little things that you can do. And that's why this the 4th bullet here says, provide canned phrases. Give parents sentences to practice, staff sentences to practice. We used clock hours for a whole year with the paras in the classroom. And the SLP came in, put together phrases, and we submitted for clock hours for staff. And we had a safe space in which we could experiment and practice and try and be goofy as a group, which it really helps if you all can just get together and figure out ways to be together and get along and giggle and do something that's a little bit out there. But it made a huge difference in our willingness to try that, and then me just biting the bullet and going, fine, I'll look ridiculous. I'll try it and see what happens. Okay. And I talked about this a little bit. You're the teachers, you're in charge. It's your classroom. Until you do it, nobody else will. And those SLPs that are coming in are trying really hard. They only get 60 minutes a week with even our most high needs kids. So find one thing that they're aiming for if it's a situation in which it's not as constructive a relationship as you would like, or they have a very different dynamic. Pick one thing and figure out one way you could do it together. I've had speech therapists come in and they're like, I want to teach a group lesson. I'm like, okay, cool. I'll do this part. Which part are you doing? And I will start enhancing, but I don't want to step on toes. Or we talk about it together and they want to try this part and I want to try this part. You have to be transparent in your communication, and you have to understand that everybody's there for the common good and the same people. It's just how we go about it is sometimes a little bit different. And SLPs, when you're coming in, on that these teachers are stressed out, just like you are. They have their content that they need to get through. So as you're watching what they're doing, Bernadette does this with me when she comes in. If you see one thing, say, hey, can I try that? I would like to do this. And then pick that little piece of the AAC that you're working on and model it in that respect so that the teacher can watch you do that. Because if they're anything like me, they're like, but I want to do that. I want it to look like that. I want that part too. Show me how to do that. And it starts to foster that, hey, we're all here for the good of these kids. How can we work together on how to do that? Okay. So these are my hopes. These are the things I want. For me, I am leaving the school I've been in for a dozen years. That's a big deal, you guys. It's time to reinvent what I do. I want to get back to some things that I've done in the past that I'm not practicing the way I want now. And I want to start again. And I'm getting old. I'm not going to be in life skills much longer. You laugh, Marcy, but at my age, life skills is a whole thing. I'm going to leave something I am very proud of before I move to whatever is next for me. So that's my goal for the next couple of years. Teachers, remember, speech can't happen in isolation. We always talk about kids generalizing skill. That's speech too. That's communication too. So you do want them to communicate. You do want them to even tell you the things you really don't want them to hear. You just then frame it in a way that they can say it constructively. SLPs, be the squeaky wheel, but be gentle and model. I said this. We see how it works. Sometimes we're a little jealous because the SLPs are like, the kids love them. You don't always get those same behaviors. It's hard to reconcile that as the teacher because you love your kids really hard, even if you're hard on them. And I am one of those ladies. But when you work on both, your kids start seeing the difference. So SLPs, be kind to those teachers and work with those teachers, and teachers, you do the same. It will make a difference. Co-teaching is a huge thing too, because the teacher can hit that academic portion and you can watch how that SLP would introduce that communication. The other thing is when I had speech therapists come in my classroom, I'm the behavior person. They're just there for communication. I'm going to be the backup. I'm going to be the bad guy and let them continue to have that role. And the kids figure it out. It tends up to be a really fantastic thing. Okay, parents, be safe in trying. Ask, do what you can. And if you need more help, go to that teacher, go to that SLP. All we really want is what's best for the kids. And we will help you figure it out. And I've said this and I'll say it again. Pick your one thing you're going to try and try it and be vulnerable and look ridiculous. And you might have screwed it up, but you're trying. And that's over half the battle. Okay, I'm going to finish with this. Because we're in education, we're going to start the next new thing. And even before we figured out how to do that thing, we're going to start the next one thing. When you are trying to do something, anything, go slow now to go fast later. Pick one lesson a day. Pick one conversation or thing that you want to do a day, and pick one way in which you're going to add that communication component. If that works, pick another. If it doesn't, well, dang it, that didn't work. What else could I try? And then take a look at where else you could fit it in. And then the last one is just communication is messy. It is not clear. It is not neat. Anybody who knows and works with any other human in the world knows that communication is messy. It is even more so for our kids. It is hard work. We're asking them to slog through physical and sensory and cognitive and everything else all at the same time. But it's always worth it. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing. I have always welcomed visitors into my classroom. If you are in the area and you want to come for a visit, I will try and make it work. Please know that I'm starting a new program and I won't know my kids in September at all. If you have questions, you can call me, you can email me. I really don't mind. I do check my email in the summer. If you're going to communicate with me on my phone, I ask that you identify yourself and tell me how you got my number, because if people just start sending me things like, I don't know you, I'm not going to answer. But that is something that you are welcome to do also. And I'm sorry I went over, Marcy. I hope I wasn't too soapboxy for everybody. I'm going to open it up for questions if anybody had any. Oh, before I forget, teachers, TPEP. If you're going to add one thing, wait until it's comprehensive, or don't. Pick one thing. I did core for a whole year, and that was my only TPEP goal. Because I did it on a year ahead comprehensive, which meant I could do my individual goal, I could do my group goal, and I could do my collaboration goal. And I could talk about how I was working with it with parents and with with staff. If you're going to take one thing you're going to do for AAC, my contact info is on really the last page of the slides for tonight. I'll also put it in the chat in just a second. If you're going to pick one, make it your sole focus, guys. Just pick the one thing and just do that one thing for a while. It gives you permission to just focus on that. And it gives you permission to invest the time, and you're going to get your data because it's where you're focusing. Okay.
Wow. Are you wrapping up, April?
I can talk all night, so I will be all done.